I love Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but I'm ready to move on. So it's hard to believe now, but it's been almost 10 years now since Breath of the Wild came out. Like, it does not feel like a full decade, but next March it will be. And in that time, we've gotten Tears of the Kingdom, which of course is a very similar game. And there's been a lot of discussions about what the future of the series is going to be. Because while a lot of people love Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, there's people who hate these games, there's people who like them but think they're bad Zelda games. And even as someone who really loves both of these games, I think Nintendo's really done all they can do with this exact style. Like, I don't want to go back to this map. I don't want a game with the same mechanics. Like, I'm ready for a new 3D Zelda game. And I do think that this is the end of the Wild era of the Zelda series. Because with the Ocarina of Time remake, if they made this in the same art style as Breath of the Wild, I would be thinking that this is just the future, but no, it's a completely different style. I highly doubt they're going to make it so you can climb everything. It would make no sense for the map of Ocarina of Time. So I'm guessing it's going to be a return to form, like traditional 3D Zelda game. Of course, being a remake, like there's only so much they can do to completely reinvent the game. But beyond the remake, what else is next? Because we know Nintendo's working on a new 3D Zelda game. I'm sure they've been working on it for 3 years now. But what's it going to be like? So the Ocarina of Time may be different than Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, which, I mean, is obvious. But is the new game going to follow the open world format? Is it going to be more return to form? We have to go to dungeons in a set order. We get items that you use to progress through dungeons. That has a more linear story. What is it going to be like? So this is all speculation, but I think it's probably going to be a mix of the Wild era of games and more traditional 3D Zelda. And I hope it is, because like I said, I feel like Nintendo did a great job taking advantage of the style of having a ton of ideas, having a ton of content. But how many games can you have doing the same thing over and over again? Like, we've seen series like Assassin's Creed that pretty much just change up the environment every game, and it's the same game every year, every 2 years or so. And Zelda's really never been that way. Like, really, there's only been 2 instances of, like, a direct sequel of a 3D Zelda game, with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask that, of course, play similar, and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So if history is to repeat itself, this is going to be something completely different. But it's also interesting because remember in 2014, 2015, when the hype around Zelda Wii U at the time was that this was going to be the most open Zelda game of all time. Like, you're going to be able to go anywhere. If you see anything in the distance, you can go to it. And now if they took that and went back where it's a more linear game, it may seem to some people that they're just scaling it back, or Nintendo, like the developers, they may feel that like they are scaling it back then, which doesn't sound like a good thing. But I think there's ways around this. I think the open world will probably be kept. I think it would be interesting if it was still locked somehow. Like, if it's a mostly open world where there's still things that lock certain areas, so you have to progress, you have to get your traditional Zelda items. I want to see a more linear story. Like, I think it's an interesting concept what they did with the past couple games where you have to unlock memories, but it doesn't hit the same since you can see memories in any order. But let's say they do a mix of that where you're able to have a mostly open world, but maybe there's not going to be as much crafting. Maybe there's going to be more things that are locked off. But how about climbing though? Because climbing was such a core feature of the past 2 games. Would they just remove that? I don't know. Yeah, it's cool to be able to climb every wall and every cliff and it unlocks everything, but I don't know if that should be like the future of the Zelda series. I would definitely love to keep a jump button, and if I had to bet, I think they're going to keep that, especially since we even saw it in Echoes of Wisdom, so I think it's a pretty safe bet to say the jump button will return. But as for everything else, who knows what they're going to do. I also think they're probably going to go out of Hyrule for the next game. I just have a feeling that that's going to happen, because there's only been one 3D Zelda game that did not take place in Hyrule. Of course, that's Majora's Mask, and we've seen it so many times already. We've seen it in Ocarina of Time, in Wind Waker, in Twilight Princess, in Skyward Sword, and of course Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and it's been different in every game. But I'd love to see like a different kind of world, or if they're going to stick with Hyrule, have a very different version, something that doesn't feel samey, which was a big problem in Tears of the Kingdom for a lot of people. Like in Wind Waker, it doesn't even feel like the same place because it's all flooded. In Skyward Sword, it felt different because there was almost no one there. Civilization was in the sky. I just think that Ionuma and everyone else who works in these games is just far too creative to not have an idea for another place that these games could go, especially if they want to have a more open style of game where you don't want it to obviously be the same map 3 times in a row. I think that could be a very interesting place to take the game. So besides that, how about something like weapons durability, which was something that was a big talking point when Breath of the Wild first came out. A lot of people just don't like it. I would like to see like maybe feel like a couple options for what you wanted to pick. But for a more traditional Zelda game, like I wouldn't mind going back to either just having one sword or a couple options and then getting the Master Sword. Because Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, like, I feel like they're its own thing where it's very much supposed to be a game with a lot more customization, where you can customize what you wear, what you use in terms of your bow, in terms of your sword, your shield. But I don't think we need that in every game. And you know what? I wouldn't even mind if we went back to another more open style Zelda game. But in the past couple years, I have been missing that more traditional Zelda feel. Now, it doesn't mean if they keep this style, I'll hate it. But I'd like to see them either try to like make these coexist, like have different Zelda games have just vastly different formulas, where some may be a little more open and some may be a little more linear. But assuming we're not getting a new 3D Zelda until like, let's say 2028 at the earliest, that'll be 5 years after Tears of the Kingdom. Like at that point, it's going to be 11 years since Breath of the Wild, and it's going to be 17 years since Skyward Sword. So it will be 17 years since the last more traditional Zelda game. And even Skyward Sword, you could argue, is not even a traditional Zelda game because it's too linear. But anyway, that's a really long time. There are going to be people who are nearly adults at that point who have not been alive for a non-Wild era Zelda game. And that's a really long wait for people who grew up with the series who maybe don't like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. Now, I don't have sympathy for the people who just attack anyone who likes Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I think that's immature. I think, frankly, it's just very stupid if you're spending your time online berating people because they like a video game differently. But I think it's completely justified if someone says, yeah, like, I'm not really a big fan of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Like, I want a more return to form Zelda game. Like, that's completely fine. So 17 years is a very, very long wait. Like, think about the wait for a 3D Mario game right now. Like, double that, basically. And also, it may just be the future of the series to just be open world. And I think, like I talked about a little before, it depends kind of how the open world is. Like, if it's going to be truly open, where you can go absolutely anywhere, there's no limits pretty much, and you can go do dungeons in whatever order you want. But it could also be open world in the sense that you still need to progress. Like, you need to do, like, you kind of have a linear story or somewhat linear story, or maybe there's like a gap that you can only get across using a hook shot, or you need to get something from one dungeon to give to someone to trigger the next set of events that leads up to you getting the entrance to the next dungeon, something like that. So I think if I had to guess, I've been going back and forth with this, even in this video, thinking about if they're just going to get rid of the open world, and I don't think they are after thinking about it more. But that doesn't mean it's going to be the same game. Like, if they have more traditional Zelda puzzles and maybe make it more story focused. Because while Zelda games have never been the most, like, story-rich games of all time, there's definitely Zelda games with some pretty good stories, especially something like Majora's Mask, which is also just very character-focused. And that's something that has kind of been lacking in the past couple of games. And it wasn't lacking before. Like, Skyward Sword, another game with a fantastic story. It's just hard to tell better stories, I feel like, when you rely on just memories and you rely on being able to hear it in any order. Because I actually did think that Tears of the Kingdom had an interesting concept, like, with the time travel, trying to figure out what actually happened to Zelda. I think that's interesting, but I don't think it compares to the best games in the series. So this is all speculation about what it's going to be, but I think once the Ocarina of Time remake comes out, that might give us a little bit like better of an idea. Because let's say they completely change Ocarina of Time, where it's just a lot less linear, where you're able to jump, where there's less small barriers that are keeping you contained. Because then that could kind of give us an idea of what the next game will be like. So I'm gonna guess it's a different team working on this than that's working on the next 3D Zelda game. But I don't think it would be crazy to say that the games may overlap, that there may be things in this game that will show up in the next one. And fortunately, it's only going to be a few months. Like, if it truly is coming out in 2026 with no delays, at most we'll have to wait like 5 months. So I'd say probably 3 or 4 months is more likely. And that'll give us a very good idea of what a more modern Zelda game could look like that also is more of a traditional Zelda game. So all we can do at this point is wait. Let me know what you think the next game is going to be like. Are you ready to move on from the wild era of Zelda 2? Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.